Okay, Walwyne Castle, also recorded in historical documents as Castle Gwalchmai, Castle Gawain, in the community of Walwyne Castle, in the historic county of Pembrokeshire, modern authority of Pembrokeshire, preserved county of Dyfed, between Haverford West and Dale in Wales. Now, before we start, let me state one thing here, please. The purpose of this presentation is to unravel historical facts about Sir Gawain, who is wrongly reduced to the medieval legend of the Green Knight. Here I am mainly referring to the books by forensic historians Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett. Let's get started. Walwyne Castle has been described as a certain timber castle and also as a certain masonry castle. The castle was built within an Iron Age hill fort by Norman invaders sometime after the death of the Prince of South West Wales, Rhys ap Tudor, in 1093. The earthworks of the medieval castle occupy the southern end of a steep-sided land promontory and are thought to have been utilized an earlier prehistoric inland promontory fort, one of a number situated along the river to Sandyhaven Pill. Tradition also associates the site to the grave of King Arthur's nephew Gawain. The medieval castle was situated in the country of Rose, an area settled by the Anglo-Normans from 1093, brought under control by Roger de Montgomery's son Arnulf from his base at Pembroke. This area was subsequently reorganized as the Lordship of Haverford, initially subject to the Earls of Pembroke. The church St. James was built in 1869, but retained the base of the tower of the previous edifice. Near the church is a very interesting ruin in capital preservation, said to be Walwyne Castle. Walwyne, it is understood, is the same as Gawain or Gwalchmai, King Arthur's nephew and brother of Medrawd or Modred, the traitor, who was Arthur's second nephew. Now, I want you to know that here we are talking about the historical 6th century king of all Britons, Arthur II, Arthur ap Moiri, king of Glamorgan and Gwent. Yes, he was a real king, a real Welsh king. Gwyar, Arthur's sister, was mother of both Gwalchmai and Modred. She was married to King Lugh ap Cynwarch. Gwalchmai is supposed to have been buried in the churchyard. So according to the Arthurian research by Wilson and Blackett, we learn that the grave of Gwalchmai, Sir Gawain, was excavated in the time of the Normans in Pembrokeshire, whilst Noe, one of Arthur's sons, probably lies buried under his mount in Herefordshire. Wilson and Blackett also state that, quote, "When the Normans arrived in coast areas of southwest Wales around 1100 AD, they were shown the grave of Gwalchmai and they promptly tore the mound apart, looking for treasure. After that, the shutters came down and English and Norman foreigners were told nothing. There was no more communication with outsiders. The constant total negativity displayed towards all ancient British native history, and particularly towards all South East Wales history, is extraordinary. The tragedy of Modred arose out of the death of Noe, and the favour shown Gwalchmai by King Arthur had the same origin. Civil war broke out Then, however, the date of the battle, and this is actually about the Battle of Camlan, you know. Where Arthur fought. This is a very famous battle which he fought. Another famous battle was the Battle of Baden, in which he fought against the Saxons. Now, the date of the Battle of Camlan has long been a matter of difficulty in dealing with the history of King Arthur's reign. Correct date was either 562 AD or 570, but not 537. Camlan Valley is located below the Camlan Mountain, 10 miles south of Dolgelly. However, civil war erupts between Modred and King Arthur. In the civil war and insurrection stirred up by Prince Modred, the other son of Gwyer and King Lu fought on the side of King Arthur. So we have a strange and very tragic situation of two brothers fighting on opposing sides, something which epitomizes the tragedy of civil war. It is also easy to overlook the fact that Gwalchmai, the Hawk of May, which is another title for Gawain, was by tradition holding high rank at the courts of King Arthur, and all the indications are that Arthur may have been considering appointing him as the edling or heir apparent. In fact, the king may have actually made his decision, and this may have been the spark which set off the anger of Modred and caused him to make his bid for power in Britain. Otherwise, it is difficult to see why Gwalchmai fought against Modred at the Battle of Camlan. In the end, the bloody struggle at Camlan resulted in the death of both of the sons of Gwyer and Lu. Gwalchmai falling to the soldiers of his own brother Modred, and Modred being killed by King Arthur's men. Finally, after the betrayals of the north by Modred, and later Walwyn Gwynedd or Walwyn Hir aka Lancelot, the kings of Britain in South Wales withdrew to hold their own personal territories, and the hegemony of the British states was lost forever. This was another quote by Wilson and Blackett. According to Gawain's burial place, there are various statements, both from Thomas Malory, who was the author of Le Mort d'Arthur, and what is more interesting, the statements in the stanzas of the graves in the Black Book of Carmarthen, according to tradition from Taliesin, who was the chief bard by King Arthur, quote, "The grave of Gwalchmai in Peridon is a disgrace to men in Llanbadarn, the grave of Kynon." Now, the location of Peridon has caused much debate, as it is probably the name of several rivers. I have not yet found an explanation for this in Wilson's books, but personally I could imagine that Peridon is referring to Llanbadarn at the same time, since Llanbadarn is also mentioned in the verse of the stanzas next to Peridon. Badarn refers to an early 6th century sanctified British Christian abbot bishop who founded St. Padarn's Church in Ceredigion, Wales. Finally, all three places are on the map and on the exact same route, namely Dolgelly, where the Battle of Camlan took place nearby, then Llanbadarn, and finally Walwyne Castle in Pembrokeshire in the south. The 10th century prophecy Armas Brydain or Praidoi Anun, a 60-line poem taken from estimates range from the time of the bard Taliesin in the late 6th century, could also point to that of the completion of the manuscript, which makes intriguing mention of Arthur, who apparently leads warriors on a raid of the Welsh otherworld. But Wilson and Blackett, however, interpret this poem on Arthur's possible journey to America. Rose in Pembrokeshire is probably a reference to Saint Gawain's chapel, with whom Gawain is often confused. Saint Gawain or Jovan was a 6th century hermit who lived in a fissure on the side of a cliff near Bosherstone, just along on the Pembrokeshire coast from Milford Haven. Well, it's not surprising when so many languages render the same name in vastly different spellings. However, let's see what Thomas Malory has to say about Gwalchmai and his last resting place in his Le Mort d'Arthur book, XXI, chapter 2, quote, "And so, at the hour of noon, Sir Gawain yielded up the spirit. And then the king let into him in a chapel within Dover Castle, and there yet all men may see the skull of him. And the same wound is seen that Sir Lancelot gave him in battle." End quote. Another quote by Wilson and Blackett, according to Malory, quote, "The London establishment is associated with a book written by Thomas Malory. He was almost certainly Thomas of Maelor, and published in 1478 by William Caxton as Mort d'Arthur in London. But Malory's book is clearly a version that has been copied elsewhere, and much more ink has been used on bogus research as to where Malory might have got his basic information and materials, and this has again been proclaimed a great mystery. The fact is that there's an ancient Cumbrian Welsh manuscript entitled Y Saint Graal, and researchers studying the origins of ancient manuscripts looked for earlier copies of all surviving specimens as of the date of the 6th, the year when Henry I of England has arrived, and that is 1106 AD. These two, Walter Map and Griffith ap Arthur, this is Geoffrey of Monmouth, were the authors responsible for causing the Arthurian stories and histories to break out of southeast Wales around 1135. The legend that flowed from the previously closed areas of southeast Wales caused a stir in Western Europe, and the obvious point is that the legend of King Arthur came from southeast Wales. This fact is diligently avoided by almost everyone who wants to be Arthurian researchers. In short, the history of southeast Wales is still a no-go area. Now we're almost at the end of my talk. Finally, I would like to conclude this conversation by saying that the well-known legend of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a good example of how Welsh King Arthur history was alienated and romanticized by some English poets and writers in the later 13th and 14th centuries, for example by Geoffrey Chaucer. The historical Sir Gawain has absolutely nothing to do with the Green Knight, as we heard in our conversation about the Battle of Camlan. An exception with a deeper meaning could at most be that Sir Gawain proves his loyalty to Arthur in kind of a blood brotherhood oath, sacrifice, against the traitor Modred. However, there is no evidence for this. Rather, the legend contains strange beheading ritualistic contests, which have been traced back to the 9th, 10th century Irish epic tale of Bricrent, later utilized in Le Livre de Caradoc, a late 12th century French work. As we have seen, the cult of the head of or skull and headhunting are eventually much older Celtic practice. We don't know. What is remarkable is that one of the later works of this mess of Arthurian romantic literature probably gives a clear clue to the direction of the religious trends in these works. The story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is fundamental, although written in the 14th century in English. Now, the church at the time was quite definitely opposed to the Grail stories and associates tales, for they were quite definitely based on early Celtic legends and stories, which were in the eyes of the church pagan and heathen. The root story for all these tales being that by the Welsh poet Blegaris, which was definitely a non-Christian poem. The stories involve magic, dreamlands, Celtic cult objects, and demon-like figures. Well, that's it from me. That was another quote by Wilson Blackett. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and bye bye.